Today on TandTeaching.
The book's written for people who choose to go into teaching to make a difference, and I think a lot of us do, or it persuades people to take more of a difference and think about the social impact we can have as educators. And the education system is classist, and the two types of classism we talk about is downward classism, which is that some elites, I mean, you see this in professions, don't you? Some elites make it almost impossible for non-elites to join them. You know, if you look at some of the figures for, you know, doctors, barristers, you know, it's I think you're 28 times more likely to go into law if your parents, you know, in law. Only 10% of published authors come from the working class. The other thing we do in the book is recommend how we can engage working class parents more in schools, not just come to parents' evenings, but actually feeling more welcome to come in and ask questions and that type of thing. Because again, what's also changed is the expectation of kids doing a lot more work at home now in secondary. That's changed a lot over time, hasn't it?
Welcome to TandTeaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arthur Moore, and with me, as always, it's Mike Harrowell. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Arthur. How are you?
I'm not too bad, buddy. Not too bad. Are you excited for today's pod?
Oh, I am very, very, very excited. We're going to be talking all about the working class in education.
Yeah, we've got Andy Griffith on to talk about his book, The Working Classroom, and the work he does across schools. This is an absolutely brilliant, interesting conversation that will get you thinking. So go away, put on that kettle, get a cup of tea, get a biscuit, and when we're back, we'll be talking to Andy Griffith about his book, The Working Classroom. Welcome back to TandTeaching. We are joined today by Andy, author of The Working Classroom. Andy, welcome to TandTeaching.
Hi, very nice to be here, Arthur. How are you?
Our absolute pleasure. And do you want to give us a quick, for listeners who maybe don't know who you are, a quick background to the Andy Griffith story, and then kind of go into why you wrote this book?
I'm a self-employed trainer. Been self-employed now since 2001, but and I design lots of different training courses for teachers and students. Mostly work in about 4 different schools now, and I guess I gravitate to working in places that are sometimes known as challenging areas or place of low social economic advantage, that type of thing, you know. Yeah.
And so you've written a few books, kind of been in that schools. I'm wondering why is this book why write this book now, kind of thing?
Yeah, I've written it with a guy called Matt Bromley. We met we met at the end of doing some training down in London at a sort of venue, you know. Went for a couple of pints afterwards. It was a Friday, you know. But yeah, we both sort of struck up a relationship, and I think we're both interested. We're both sort of working class lads, and I think we're both interested in sort of class as an issue and how it's now a lot harder, I think, for working class people to do well in the system. So I start the book, as Matt does, talking about our own stories, but certainly as a free school meals kid who got a full grant, got a chance to go to university, which changed my life, by the way. I'm grateful for the fact that I got full grant, housing benefit, you know, bus pass, all of that. But I think if I was 18 years old today, then I wouldn't have gone to university. I just think things have changed so much. And I think it's, so the book is trying to help teachers who already work hard to do more, I guess, in a positively discriminatory way for perhaps the less advantaged kids in schools, because I think that society's doing less for them. The economy's doing less for them. So the book's written for people who choose to go into teaching to make a difference, and I think a lot of us do, or it persuades people to take more of a difference and think about the social impact we can have as educators.
Because I think we talk, when we're in training, we talk a lot about kind of economic background, and we talk about kind of different ways our students are kind of coming to school. But one thing we maybe don't talk about is class. Like,
Yeah.
Mike, I don't know if you ever had that at any point in your training, the word class come up. I certainly didn't.
No, not all. No.
So I'm just wondering, Andy, from your kind of perspective, like, is it a separate issue, or is it all kind of intertwined? And how do we recognize like classes in our school, or kind of where we're working?
Yeah,
Big
I mean,
question, I feel.
well, funny-ish story. First of all, we got quite a lot of good press with the book, and it was a big spread in the Times. And then I think a day later, Melanie Phillips described the book as Marxist drivel. You know, I mean, I think anybody who talks about class is straight away accused of being a Marxist and wants freedom for tooting and wears a beret, and you know, and I don't want freedom for tooting. I don't wear a. I'm just a a left to centre ordinary sort of guy, really, just works in education. I think I think when you look at sort of injustices and you look at the progress we've made in some areas, like if you think about where we are now with sort of sexuality compared to say 20, 30 years ago, there's just been a load of progress, hasn't there? But I think class is almost it's the sort of last area where that very little progress has been made. If you look at, it's sometimes called the white working class. I'm loath to use the phrase white working class, but certainly working class underachieve. And that's been going on for 40, 50 years, And I think you've got to question whether it's the fault of those students, those families, or perhaps the education system hasn't found a way of either connecting with those people. I don't know. I mean, Mike, you work in Harlow, don't you? So what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I guess it's something you've got to recognize. I don't think you can say we're going to teach each student exactly the same because every child should be treated exactly the same. And I think that there's a quote, isn't there, that the annihilation of category does not create equality. We've got to recognize that those working class, and I know in a lot of contexts I've been in, it's working class boys. That's the main underachieving area.
Yeah.
You have to recognize them as a group that have different needs. Now, whether that's because of lack of access maybe to technology, lack of access to opportunities, like you said, in terms of no full scholarships to university anymore, whereas, sometimes a lack of education from the parents in terms of their experience of going to university. If they don't have that experience, they don't necessarily know how to support their child going through that and applying for that process. So I think as a school, you have to put different measures in place. I just went to a classroom the other day to set up a lesson in advance, and one of our teachers was in there with some students. I don't know the background of these students, but he was giving them individualized help doing their college application forms, and he was making sure that they wrote the right sort of things and prompting them. Do you think you could write this? Would this help your application? And really, really supporting those students in those college applications. And I don't know the circumstances behind that, but that's definitely the sort of extra things that we can be doing to support a certain category of student, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, we talk about the need for the extra and the different, and I think, there's a couple of areas straight away. I mean, first of all, Mike, you'll be aware that Tony Blair and David Cameron talked about the classless societies, like some sort of dream that's a classless society. There's phrases around like social mobility, which implies that, well, you can interpret it as the working class is a good thing to get out of. If you can get out of being working class, you can be upwardly mobile. It's a good thing. So what does it say about your class? So I think actually one of the things we talk about in the book, because Matt and I firmly believe it to be true, is that the society is classist, and the education system is classist. And the two types of classism we talk about is downward classism, which is that some elites, I mean, you see this in professions, don't you? Some elites make it almost impossible for non-elites to join them. You know, if you look at some of the figures for, you know, doctors, barristers, you know, it's I think you're 28 times more likely to go into law if your parents, you know, in law. Only 10% of published authors come from the working class. You know, so there's loads of things that we refer to that are just obvious. There's obvious barriers put in place. Now, schools aren't responsible for that, but I think teachers and schools need to realise that those barriers do exist. Like, for instance, in some industries, you can't really get in unless you can do an unpaid internship for a longer period of time. You know, probably in the metropolis as well.
I'm wondering if,
Yeah,
sorry, Andy, I was wondering if, like, you know, like
yeah,
we have in our registers, Mike, we have this student is pupil premium, this
yeah,
student is in care, this student is a care
mm.
experienced child, sorry, I should say, but we don't put a W next to the kid that is from a working class background, and therefore acknowledge that in our planning kind of explicitly, like we would do with pupil premium or certain areas. I'm just wondering if that's like,
Well, I'm not really in favour of that. I mean, I think one of the things we're trying to bring up in the book is that the extra and the different. You know, the first thing is that great schools really have a strong core curriculum that all students have access to, and that includes very diverse extracurricular opportunities as well. So I'm sure you both be aware that Ofsted now inspect on something called cultural capital. You know, they'll be looking at what schools do to enrich, if you like, however you interpret that, students' lives beyond their own sort of experience. But I think what I mean by the extra and the different, and the way we've done it in the book anyway, is that we talk about, for lower attaining students who may or may not be working class, by the way, but it's highly likely that a high proportion will be, Arthur, is that we create and design really good, strong interventions. Now, they could be reading interventions, behavior interventions, but they are measured and they make a difference. And for higher attaining working class students, of which I'd probably fall into the category, Mike, you probably would as well. I don't know about yourself, Arthur, but from what I said before, that we would put something in place that would probably develop their social capital. You know, that they can't afford, and this is the bizarreness of our system, isn't it? That schools' data sometimes reflects the fact that a student's got loads of support at home, or private tutors have helped them get better grades. Well, that isn't open to a lot of working class kids. So can they get extra through some sort of in-school tutoring? Can they get some extra through, you know, we do in the 4 scholars programs that I've set up in different schools. So these are for higher attaining students. Most of them are in the pupil premium category. We have bespoke sessions for them, trips to universities, but we also have Zoom calls with people who they're interested in, perhaps conversing with, because they're interested in that particular career. How else would they come, you know, if they're interested in going into law, how else? So we got to find creative ways to find a network of barristers, doctors, engineers, authors that want to speak to these students, and they do, by the way. I think people are tremendously generous. And setting up scholars programs is about getting a team of people in a school to creatively try to engineer a program and a journey for students that really helps them to build things like their social capital, but also perhaps change another form of classism, which is called internalized classism. Some students, I don't know if you've ever come across these guys, but some kids will, sometimes known as imposter syndrome, will talk themselves out of doing something because it's not for them. And some places, from our research, some social spaces are made deliberately uncomfortable for working class people to to enjoy or to feel like they can flourish. So they do feel like a fish out of water. So a lot of my work with students is to try to get them not to feel like a fish out of water, to grow a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, if you don't mind me saying so. I've cured myself of imposter syndrome completely. But it was something that even when even probably I still probably had into my early 30s, you know. So it's important that you pass some of that knowledge and wisdom on to students. But I think some of the things like you saying about the register, Arthur, about, you know, pupil premium kids or mark their books first or whatever. I think some of those things are a bit tokenistic. So you know,
yeah.
so our book recommends, I think, pretty thorough things you can do within the core curriculum, and then also within the extracurricular provision and co-curricular provision, which and what I mean by that is it happens in school time, because a lot of working class kids in the areas that I work won't stay after school to engage with a scholars program. We have to do it within school time. Sorry, I've been talking a long time. They're gone.
I was going to say, Mike, you were nodding big time at the end, just talking about like, because we all know about extra curriculum, but that's assuming the student wants to stay
Or can stay,
or can stay for the
can
extra
stay. Yeah,
curriculum.
yeah.
So I'm just wondering, Mike, in like the schools you've worked in, is that something you're aware of, and how do you kind of combat that?
So, yeah, the most successful schools I've worked in who run really good enrichment, extracurricular, whatever you want to call it, programs are set up to target students who don't have access to opportunities like that outside of school. So they're your priority students. So, you know, if I give you an example, you send out your sign-ups for extracurricular, you get all your students signed up. You then go through those sign-ups and you look at which students from certain categories. So, you know, you might look at your free school meals, you might look at your SEN students. And then you then go and target those parents with phone calls home to make sure they understand the importance of extracurricular and the opportunities that are available. And you encourage and you build that relationship with the parents to encourage the child to come and take an opportunity of that, because we all know the longer children spend in school within reason, the more successful they're going to be. And those extracurricular opportunities are giving them opportunities outside of the national curriculum to get different experiences. So I've seen schools, you know, fund horse riding lessons for students who would never ever get near, you know, that opportunity otherwise. You know, they'll take them there, they'll pay for the lesson, they'll bring them back. I've seen schools give drinks and snacks at the end of clubs so that students are fed before they go home. So yeah, I've seen some amazing programs and ways of setting it up to make sure as many of those students attend extracurricular and enrichment opportunities as possible.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're going to say something, Arthur. Go on.
I was going to say, one of the schools I worked in would have what it would call extracurriculum at the end of the day, but it was part of the school day. It was a compulsory part of the school day, with just the end of the day ending earlier to allow this time. And that's when we could, as you say, might like target students, be like, why don't you come along and try this? Or like, I know you don't know anything about this, but why not like come along and talk about this?
Yeah.
And that worked really effectively in that context. Sorry, Andy, you were saying.
No, I think with the remit now about developing cultural capital in schools, is something we talk extensively about in the book. And it's controversial about you know, teaching children the best that has been thought and said, you know, to quote, you know, the Arnold quote, because that's a very subjective thing. So one of the things we talk about to try to avoid you know, any hint of classism within school is that, you know, students should have opportunities that are outside of their comfort zone. Absolutely, you know, ballet, classical music, absolutely no problem at all. But also I think that they need to realize as well that working class arts and working class artists have made a significant contribution also to our culture. And those people should also be studied. So just as when I went to school in the 70s and 80s, I don't think, even though I went to a multi-ethnic school in Tottenham, I don't think any of the books we read were by black authors. or they're black characters. And that's happily really changed now. And, you know, you'd like to think that students can see themselves within the curriculum. We also talk about the power of film, you know, film clubs and, you know, studying films where you've got some incredible films which will teach you about social knowledge as well. You know, we talk about, you know, Mike, you mentioned there about trips, but one of the phrases we use in the book is sparking, is that if an experience, and it could be a work shadowing opportunity, because work experience used to be a lot more extensive, didn't it? Less so now. But we try to get work experience for the scholars in our schools, and that can be a week, or it can be a couple of days, can be just a day, or they go on a trip. But if it sparks an interest or it sparks motivation, then that's incredible. So if I can give you one example, so a student I'm working with at the moment in Kirby in Merseyside, I met her probably 3 years ago. So she's always got an interest. She's always an interest in doing film makeup. And well, I don't know anyone in film makeup. I don't, you know. So next thing, I was on a walking holiday with some mates, and my mate's mate does film makeup, and his brother still does it. So he does, you know, makes prosthetics and things like that. So he did a Zoom call with this girl. This guy, by the way, has worked on Labyrinth. He's done David Bowie's makeup in Labyrinth. You know, he's like got his old IMDb unbelievable page. And this guy gave up time, spoke to this girl, sent her a book, organised a one-day placement for her somewhere, and it's literally changing her life. You know, so those things will only come if staff in schools are proactive and do some of the things that they would probably do for their own children, you know? So I think what's really interesting about you know, the more you go up the social ladder, the more connections people have got, haven't they? And adversely, you know, it declines as you go down the social ladder. So I think if you've got someone who's really got an interest in something, or one of those trips or experiences has sparked something, and you can spark that further, it goes beyond just that interest, because then students recognize, right, I need to get my head down and get those grades. I do that extra work and that type of thing. So that's one small thing, but it's also a big thing because it changes someone's life, you know. So the other thing we're quite keen on doing is, although it is changing the narrative that for bright working class kids, university is the be all and end all. My own kids went to university. I'm increasingly disappointed in what I think kids are getting from university these days, the cost and everything else. And I think we also do a lot of work with companies about high level apprenticeships, high level degree apprenticeships, which I think are a lot more appealing now to some working class families for obvious reasons, the debt notwithstanding and not going to incur. So what we're trying to do is equip kids with different programs, different pathways. And the book provides some just different ideas for that. So although I've mostly talked about more some of the higher attaining students, sometimes an experience, like you were saying, Mike, it could be an extracurricular club or a trip or a Zoom call with someone or a career interest that's actually helps them to realize, right, I'm on a pathway now. I'm on a pathway to an apprenticeship. I'm on a pathway to a job. And that engages them very deeply. And I think there's a big problem in schools at the moment with motivation engagement. It's the first book I wrote was called Engaging Learners, funnily enough. And I think it's even worse than it was when I first wrote that book. I think we've got to find with the lack of resource that we have, and we are starved of resources in the state sector. I think we need to find creative solutions. Good news is we are very creative in education. Teachers are unbelievably creative people. And this book gives you ideas how you can be more creative with how you design your curriculum, your interventions, your enhancements, so that more working class kids can achieve and feel successful.
Have you got an example from the book, Andy, where someone, like one of the tips maybe, where a teacher's come to you and said, like, try this, and like what like this was brilliant, I would recommend this to kind of every teacher? Is do you have that kind of top tip from the book almost?
Well, I can give you a few. I mean, one of them is, in fact, all the books I've written about, I use this acronym called CASH: Knowledge, Attitude, Skills, and Habits. So my best-selling book was called Teaching Backwards. So, you know, you design backwards from what you're trying to achieve. So if you've got a group of students that you start in year 8 and in year 11, you want them to get good exam results, go into different contexts, but not feel like a fish out of water, become self-confident, speaking to adults in different contexts. You will design a program that gives them those experiences over that journey. So there's a lot of tips in the book about how you would design such a program. Another example is a school that's got a cultural passport, which I think is a fantastic idea. And really what you talk about is that when a student comes to your school, they're going to have a list of things that they are guaranteed that they're going to experience before they leave the school. So it can be, as you say, theatre, you know, watch a film, whatever. And it's for you to decide what that is and how to resource that. But both of those examples show that someone's sitting down and carefully thinking about what those students are going to look like at the end of the journey. So when they leave year 11, what will have they experienced? And some of them might not like it, some of them might hate it, but you just don't know until you put those experiences in front of students. So a lot of it is a lot of what I'm writing about are learning design principles, working backwards from students being more confident, being more knowledgeable, and being in a way trained not to feel inadequate in certain situations, because actually there's what we have at the back of the book is 7 example lessons, Arthur. So one of the lessons is like a drama lesson, for instance. So how you might behave in a situation where, say, like your first day at university, someone deliberately or accidentally, but you interpret someone's behavior as they're putting me down, like, and then you interpret that in your mind as, I don't deserve to be here. This isn't for me. So a lot of it is about sort of war game type, working through those things that I think a lot of working class kids are inevitably going to face. And I think a lot of kids do drop out of things too early, but with a little bit more life knowledge, a bit more experience, a bit more of a strong network around them, they wouldn't have done that. So there's a couple of examples: cultural passport and designing a program built around cash that you want your students to leave with.
I think the idea of a cultural passport, of like these guaranteed opportunities you're going to have, is a really nice way to talk to a student, of like also being part of that kind of community of like, we are all getting these experiences. Like, doesn't matter like where you come from, whatever, like we're all going to get these experiences. Mike, I was just wondering if that kind of, any of that kind of resonates with you and kind of the context you've currently worked in and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea of first days. Like, what's your first day going to be like? What's it going to make you feel like? And then one thing I was thinking about was just kind of taking a diversion off from what you were talking about there, and it was cash. And there's a fantastic phrase in sport of like, every day you train, you bank some cash in your bank, and then when it comes to the competition, you get to make a withdrawal. And all those experiences are like that, aren't they? Those students are, they just put the experience in the bank, and then when they get into that situation where they might even go freeze or flight. You know, they might stand there and be like, "Oh, I don't know what to do," or "Get me out of here." You know, I feel so uncomfortable. I don't want to be in this situation. And they, like you said earlier, they stop themselves going into those situations because of how they know they're going to feel.
When I'm working with leaders, Mike, and you're doing, like, you know, the classic leadership away day, you're doing training around that, are really, really good at. It's easy enough to set a vision and set a pathway as a leader or as a teacher, but what a robust plan does is build in some pre-mortems. You know, you do a bit of war games. So what I do by taking some students through some scenarios that I hope they don't encounter, but if they did, here's how you could react to those people. It just hopefully memorable experiences that get them to grow and realize that that place is for them. So again, this school in Kirby where I mostly work, last year's head boy, Jonathan, because the school's a 7 to 11 school, so he's gone on there to a college. You know, he got mostly 9s across his GCSEs. But really changed a lot. I think not just due to the program. Most of it's down to him. But he went beyond just, you know, first of all, I don't think university's me, then it was, then the type of university he's going to go to. So you could see the way his mind was working. And I think I'm conscious because I've suffered from it myself. I think when you come from a background of poverty, I do think that always stays with you to a certain extent. Not it doesn't stay with me now, but it stayed with me for a long time. So you can talk yourself out of things, or you can adopt a set of beliefs that are quite limiting. And so I just wanted to help some fellow working class people to get to that point a bit earlier in their lives, really, just by adopting certain things and recognizing in their head, and recognizing actually that, for instance, just because someone's got a strong accent or speaks in RP, received pronunciation, doesn't mean to say they're better than you. But some working class people can internalize that. And we've got to be very careful, by the way, in how we teach oracy in schools now. I'm sure you're aware that it's a controversial issue, that we want students to be able to code switch and to speak correctly in different circumstances, but they should never feel that there's something wrong with their own culture. So it's a tricky thing that we do, but yeah, I love designing courses which get people to think. But if you're doing a course over a period of time, you've got to build in some things like that, really, Mike. Some pre-mortem, this is some worst case scenarios. What would you do in this situation? Because if those things do come up, it prepares you for that, and you make your plan more robust, so that those things don't just derail you. They're just bumps in the road,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you asked any parent, any teacher, if they would prefer their children to go to school, get really, really good grades, but not have those skills, or the other option would be to get some average grades, but have those skills. I know what 99% of those parents and those teachers would
Well,
agree on.
I think all three of us know, don't we? I mean, I think Ian Gilbert has talked about it. Ian Gilbert's one of my heroes, who edited a book called The Working Class, by the way. So I recommend that for anybody listening. But he talks about the great education lie, and the great education lie is you pass lots of qualifications and you're set for life. Well, it's just a massive lie, because, as you said, Mike, if you've got a pretty strong get up and go personality and an average set of qualifications, I think you'll do better than someone who, will, the first setback, they crumble, So I think the other thing we talk about in the book is building specific knowledge domains. And I think we're big fans of disciplinary knowledge. Both Matt and I really believe in the exam system. Okay, it's a bit biased and it's a bit classist in some setup, but I do think disciplinary knowledge is important. But we argue for more teaching in schools of social knowledge, cultural knowledge, and personal knowledge. And sometimes, especially the personal knowledge stuff, is sort of shoved in the PSE slot in schools. But this generation of kids is going to face more change because of changes in climate and world population and things like that than probably any other generation. So they've got to learn how to manage change, and they've got to learn how to deal with adversity in a society where perhaps probably more than when we all went to kids, parents mollycoddle their kids. So it's a tough challenge for schools to do that. But certainly the other thing we do in the book is recommend how we can engage working class parents more in schools, not just coming to parents' evenings, but actually feeling more welcome to come in and ask questions and that type of thing. Because again, what's also changed is the expectation of kids doing a lot more work at home now in secondaries. That's changed a lot over time, hasn't it? And I think we saw during the pandemic, didn't we? And I think Vic Goddard talks quite a lot about this, that really showed up the pandemic, didn't it? The big class divides in our country, because you've got those students who've got a household with people and resources that can support them, and there's other households that just can't, and the reality is that aside from private tutors, the work that's done at home now by some tutors compared to the students that can't work at home have got an enormous advantage. So yeah, the question is, what can we do to make the time in school much more effective for all students, but how can we provide the extra and the different for some who we think really need it?
And that feels like a perfect question to kind of round up our conversation, Andy, even though I think we could keep talking for ages. The books, what I really like about the book, people, it's called The Working Classroom. There's so many things that you take away and then can go and implement. It's full of tips. We were kind of talking off pod, me and Mike and Andy, of just like how many things that you can read the book, and then there's so much that you can go and do. So like highly recommend it. And if people want to go and find out more about the book, or they want to find out more about you and what you do, what do they do? Where do they go?
Yeah, so the book is called The Working Classroom. So it's published by Crown House. So you can get it from the Crown House website or from Amazon. There is a website that goes with the book called theworkingclassroom.co.uk, and all one word, The Working Classroom. So if you go on there, you'll find mine and Matt's details. And we provide some inset and training courses based on the book as well. So things like how to set up a scholars program, how to build cultural capital, brackets, in the right way. Sounds a bit arrogant, but I think some schools maybe build cultural, it's a bit of a tick box exercise, but I think there's a way of building cultural capital that can really spark interest in students and make working class students a lot prouder of their heritage as well. So that's really important. So yeah, those are to be where you go really, Arthur. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy. It's been an absolute privilege talking to you, Andy. Learned so much, got so many notes in front of me. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on TandTeaching, and listeners, we'll be back in a moment.
Welcome back to TandTeaching. We've just had a wonderful chat with Andy Griffith, all about the working class and education, things we can do, Arthur, things we should be doing. So what was your key takeaway from that?
A really interesting conversation from someone who clearly is incredibly passionate about what they do. That always shines through when we speak to people. So like, that was my main thought. Like, Andy's incredibly passionate. For me, it was when he was talking about designing backwards, like understand your context, but don't build up from the context. What do we want our students to kind of leave with? And this is where he was talking about like a cultural passport, but then go backwards, designing from there. I thought that was a really interesting way of kind of going around all these ideas of kind of building up our students and kind of acknowledging classism and stuff like that. So design backwards for me, I thought was really interesting. How about you?
Yeah, I love that idea of sparking. So spark their interest in something, and give them those experiences and those opportunities that maybe they wouldn't have had before. And he gave some really good examples there of students who have had that experience, or been able to help people develop those experiences, and it's then really helped them on later on in life. So yeah, I think that was a really impactful aspect to that conversation.
I think there's a lot of what we spoke about today for people who are going to go away and kind of digest and think about and process, and then kind of ask questions of themselves, which as educators, we should always be asking questions of ourselves. So thank you, Andy, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Mike, a pleasure as always. Thank you for listening to this episode of TandTeaching.
If you've enjoyed the content of this episode, please feel free to share it with other educators.
And if you're able to, please leave a review on the platform.
And as always, thank you for listening to TandTeaching.